Welcome, guys. So, just a brief recap on the past 4 weeks and the tools that were presented each week, since this is our very last class. The focus or the tool of the first week was seeing how suffering was related to want. And so we made those two words synonymous. And we gave a bunch of examples of how that's so, where we can see that in our own experience, where to look for that in our own experience, so we can have our own direct witnessing of it, our own direct insight of it, and see it for ourselves. When we see it for ourselves, then that changes the way we do things. And so we gave examples of where to look for wanting, being, suffering. And then the following week was the focus, or the tool was to see how when the mind was wanting, how the grip on the body, that began to move in. And how when the mind wasn't wanting, the absence of the grip. And so therefore, we can see our body, and begin to look at our body as the roadmap to awakening. It can tell us what thoughts are skillful and what thoughts are unskillful. And so it's our own personal roadmap. We have the tendency to think that the thing that we want or our desire will end up making us happy. But how often does it really just drag out some type of suffering throughout the day? And so by paying attention to our body as the roadmap to awakening, what is really happening in the body when the mind is doing the wanting, or when the mind is doing whatever it's doing. And so once again, it's the direct experience of these things that begins to change the way we approach life. So that week was how the body is the roadmap to enlightenment. And then the following week, the third week, was one of my favorite ones. It was the correlation of knowing and ignorance, and examples of where and how that shows up in our life. So we can begin to see that in our own lives, those places, and begin to de-energize, begin to deconstruct or knock the wind out of the sails, that compulsive part of the mind. Whether it's in previous weeks, which is wanting, or in that third week, knowing, being right. These conclusions that it draws, and we innately believe them. And so looking for places where those conclusions actually are not true, actively looking. That was the focus or the tool for the third week. And then the fourth week, last week, the focus was in solidifying what is happening now as like a tree. So it's equating whatever's happening now to a tree. So if there's thoughts happening now, or if there's an emotion happening now, then it's like a tree. And so it takes some time to move it. There's an approach to move it. Whereas when you don't understand that approach, like a child doesn't understand how to get what they want, they throw fits. And so our mind does a similar kind of fit throwing whenever it doesn't feel in the way that it wants to feel, for instance. And so by seeing everything as a tree, seeing thought and emotion as a tree, In this moment, it is just there. It doesn't help to throw a fit. Throwing a fit doesn't move the tree. Throwing a fit doesn't move the emotion. It doesn't move the mind state. Then we can begin to settle into the reality that is here, that is present, which is the mind state, the thoughts, or the emotion. And then we also went into some direct mindfulness practices. So that was the kind of tool for the 4th week. And that brings us to our 5th and last class today. And so this class won't be so much another tool or that we actively use to deconstruct the mind, but more so it will be the recognition that whatever is here now is the final refuge. So instead of more tools, it's what is here now, what your life is like, what our lives are like now is the refuge that we're looking for. And so instead of having tools to fix things and change things the way our life is, the final refuge, which is the name of this last class, is exactly your life. And so the whole name of this last class will be the final refuge, a constant transition. And we'll go more into later the constant transition part. But for now, the final refuge and our life being that, it can be looked at in a few different ways. One is we can't escape our life. And so exactly what's happening in it is the refuge. That is the place that we can begin to go to for refuge, for safety, for home. And if you think about it, your life has never not been your life situation. Your life has never not been this body. Your life has never not been the way you feel or think. This has always been with you. And so this is the refuge. This is what we're after. Exactly what our life is. And so instead of having the tools like we had the previous weeks to begin to de-energize the mind, which is helpful, and to deconstruct the mind, which is helpful, and different tools and perspectives and approaches for approaching our emotions and our mind states, which is a kind of attempt to change them. Instead, the focus of this class is going to be that they are the refuge. They are what we're looking for. This is easy to just say. And sometimes that isn't our experience. And those sometimes particularly are when things are emotional or intense or reactive. And so what I want to do in this class is begin to normalize and even see the necessity of those emotions or of those reactions. And honor that experience. And so let's talk about what that experience primarily is. Whenever there's a reaction kind of like what we talked about in the previous class, say, with someone that you're close with. After that reaction comes up in you, it first presents itself as an externalized story. And that's how we're going to be referring to a reaction, as an externalized story. And it's externalized because it is that person was bad or the situation was wrong. And so that's how it's external. Ultimately, even though it seems like at surface level that they're the cause of the badness or the wrongness, or the situation is the cause of the badness or wrongness, because if it wasn't for the situation of that person, I wouldn't be feeling bad or wronged. However, investigating it a little more deeply, we can see that that's actually sourced from something much earlier in our lives. And so what we're going to do is highlight normalize and even see the necessity in these externalized stories. So these externalized stories of how this person was wrong or bad, or the situation was wrong or bad, comes up so we can heal the limited conclusions that we drew from our child mind much earlier in life. And so it's important for us to honor and normalize these externalized stories, these reaction stories of how this person was bad or this situation was wrong, because it has a very important purpose. It's real easy to see how when the thoughts come up, the pain that those thoughts cause in the body. And so to want to push it away or to clearly see how it's causing my suffering. But it also has a purpose. So I want to begin to normalize the parts of our experience that we usually like the least, which is these reactionary, externalized stories. They are necessary, though. And they need to be honored. And so the necessity of them is they're showing us the conclusions that we'd come to with our childhood mind of a similar situation, of where we were not loved, where we had concluded that this situation, or when a person does such a thing, it means that they don't like me, or it means that I was bad. And so it comes up in the moment as the externalized story of how this person was bad or wrong. So we have a chance to see it. And when we have a chance to see that story is how those conclusions that we drew with our limited childhood minds began to evolve. So if we didn't have these reactions, if we didn't have these externalized stories, then everyone would just stay the same. Everyone would just play out their patterns for eons. But because there's that reaction, that emotional, energetic movement outward, and then it comes out in the form of the externalized story, we get to see those conclusions we had come to long ago, maybe at the age of 7, when we did the best we could to interpret and understand our experiences. We interpreted what had happened as, oh, I am bad. Or maybe at 14, we did the best we could to understand what was happening, and the conclusion we'd come to was, I'm unlovable. Or maybe at 21, the conclusion that we had come to with our still maturing mind was, I'm not liked. This means, this is evidence of. And so that became the proclivity of the mind. That became the inclination to interpret in such a way. And so when a similar situation arises in the present time, that comes out in the form of the externalized story. And so you're starting to see the value of honoring the story while it's there. Listening to the story, kind of like we talked in the last class, as you would listen to a friend who is hurt. Now, granted, we don't want to get caught up in this story for our whole lifetime. And the way that we don't get caught up in any one particular story our whole lifetime is seeing it as having those hidden messages, as being the doorway to evolving our conclusions that we had come to when we were a child. Our externalized stories from reactions are the doorway to evolve the conclusions that we had come to when we were a child. So we need to honor the part that we like the least, really, about this refuge of life, which is the externalized story, and the clear pain that it brings every time the thoughts come up about that story. We feel it in the body. So we need to honor this part too, because it is also the refuge, and it is necessary. And to the degree that we can begin to do that for ourselves is to the degree that we can begin to do that for another as they aim their misunderstood conclusions as a child at you. So to the degree that we can honor our own externalized story as it comes up, just randomly, whenever it happens to come up, whether that's in the middle of a interaction with someone or whether that's just on your own time, to the degree that you can honor and see the necessity of, and even the hidden message in what this externalized reactive story is saying, is to the degree that whenever someone else is doing that, particularly when their story is aimed at you, then you can help them heal their own misunderstood childhood interpretations just by you being there to receive it. Not even to say anything necessarily, because you're giving them the opportunity to see their externalized story. And they have to be able to see their externalized story to even begin to heal it, to even begin to come to a greater realization of those limited interpretations as a child. They have to be able to see that externalized story of how you were wronged, how they were wronged by you. That's hard when the people closest to us are seeing us currently in a bad light. In that moment, when their externalized story is pointed at you, that can be difficult. It can be difficult because we don't want to see ourselves in the light that they're seeing us in. But it really has nothing to do with us. And that's their externalized story from their limited interpretations that their childhood mind came to in a similar experience. And so, the more we can normalize these things and therefore see the refuge that it is in the part that we usually interpret our life the least as a refuge, which is these externalized stories, then we can begin to honor other people when they're in their healing moments of a painful externalized story of how someone or something had wronged them. So we're beginning to see the refuge that every part of life really is, the necessity of it. It's a refuge because it's necessary for evolution. It's necessary for it to evolve. And so therefore you're being given the tools to hone your refuge. You're being given the tools to be able to have pretty pictures all over the wall of your refuge. Because that's what it takes. It takes honoring the externalized thought. The honoring it is the seeing the necessity and the value, looking for the hidden message in these externalized stories of ours of how we were wronged or how the situation was bad. We have to see that first to begin to evolve from it, to begin to heal it. So we're normalizing the part of our life that we don't see as a refuge and that we generally want out of the second it happens. Because the real practice of mindfulness is being mindful of those mind states too. Mindfulness isn't necessarily just about being calm, although it can lead to that. It's not about that, though. It's about awakening to the reality of exactly what is happening. And exactly what is happening in oftentimes the most unrefuge-like parts of our life experience is I'm in pain. They did me wrong. This situation is bad. And so we're just becoming aware or becoming awake to those externalized stories when they arise. And we can even call them, oh, this is an externalized story, or I'm externalizing my pain onto you. I'm externalizing my pain onto this situation through the means of the story. And so in our mindfulness book, and this little portion I'm going to read here in a moment, it refers to this as bare knowledge. And just being aware of the bare knowledge of things. And immediately whenever a person says that, what comes to mind is, oh, that means being calm. And so I need to force and suppress and make myself calm in order to be successful at bare knowledge or to be successful at being mindful. But it really just means including everything that's going on. And if part of what's going on right now is a reactive externalized story, then that's what we're mindful of. So no matter what is going on, we're including that. And that is awakening. Bare knowledge. This is what we're learning how to do. Keep coming back to the bare knowledge. And bare knowledge very well could be, and there's an externalized story right now. And the truth of it is, there's a reason, a purpose, necessity behind that pain, that thing that we don't want to consider a part of the refuge. And to know the purpose and the necessity of it can help us begin to be aware of it in the form of bare knowledge when it arises, instead of thinking that it's wrong or we're failing at our mindfulness practice when it's there. So here in the book, they're referring to the final refuge as bare knowing. The unspoken question in our mindfulness practice is just how much mindfulness is needed. Mindfulness, and the answer is the mindfulness that there is a feeling or there is mind, is established in one to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. I'm going to read that one again. Mindfulness that there is feeling or there is mind is established in one to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. Bare knowledge here means observing or knowing objectively what is arising without getting lost in associations, reactions, judgments, or evaluations. Or if we do get lost, and this is the key point, or if we do get lost, because that can happen too, and then to become aware of those states themselves. That then becomes the new thing to be aware of. Oh, right now I'm lost. Oh, right now I'm confused. Because if you're aware of that you're confused, you're no longer confused. If you're certain you're confused, then you are not confused anymore. And that is mindfulness. That is awakening. To just know what's going on. And that's your human's experience. Confused, lost. As an example, imagine having a painful tension in the jaw. We might notice this unpleasant jaw tension. Might be mindful of it at first. But then add the commentary, I'm such an uptight person because of the tension in the jaw. Or we might have a pleasant feeling of a concentrated and spacious mind, and then experience proliferation of thought about what a good meditator we are. But instead of those proliferating thoughts about pleasant, how concentrated and spacious our mind was during meditation, or unpleasant, the tension in our jaw, we can simply have bare knowledge that a pleasant or unpleasant feeling is present. Or instead of analyzing why certain emotions arise and diving into our entire psychological history, we can simply know that there is lust or absence of lust, ill will or absence of ill will. Here, we're mindful just to the extent necessary for bare awareness. This bare awareness reveals a lot about the nature of the knowing mind. We begin to observe that bare knowing is effortless. It is the very nature of the mind itself. It's kind of like a mirror. We can see this so clearly with sounds. When we're undistracted and then a sound arises, that sound is known spontaneously, effortlessly, and exactly. We don't need to make an effort to hear it. This is the mirror-like quality of the mind. We can also experience the same spontaneous knowing in a movement. When we're undistracted, the sensations of the movements are being known effortlessly. It's like the arm when it moves. There isn't wild thought proliferations about this movement, but oftentimes there is wild thought proliferations about our jaw whenever it's painful. It goes into a story, or after our concentrated and spacious mind in our meditation goes into what a great meditator we finally are. But the true bare knowing is simply you just know that the arm is moving. Like you can even do this for yourselves in this moment. You see that there's an effortless knowing. You know darn well that your arm is moving. And that can be the same effortless knowing of the movement that's happening. As with your arm, as with the movement of thought, or as with the movement of emotion. This bare knowing is not something we try to create. Rather, it is something we come back to. Creating would be the thought structures. It's like, oh, I need to get this right, and this needs to be this way. Whereas if you're coming back to it, there's the coming back to the awareness of just what is literally present. Coming back to what is already happening. We're not creating what is already happening. Currently, my arm is moving. I don't need to create thoughts about what is already happening. It's already happening. Same way, if my thoughts are confused, I don't need to create more thoughts about how my thoughts are confused. I can just know that my thoughts are confused. Or if I'm experiencing anger or frustration, I don't need to create more thoughts about the anger and frustration. I can just know the movement, that it is present. Know that it is present. In a similar way, we know when the arm is moving. This bare knowing. A little mantra that has helped me in my practice is the reminder of this aware nature. It's already here. In these instructions, in the refrain, the Buddha is first saying we should establish mindfulness to the extent necessary for bare knowledge. That means simplifying, which can be challenging. It means it means letting the mind settle back into non-interference awareness. Non-interference awareness is like what we talked about in the last class of listening as the thoughts organically rise and do whatever they do. Whereas interference would be the back and forth thing that tends to happen in our mind that builds. So non-interference awareness is just listening or being aware, not interfering with whatever it is that's coming up. This would be the bare knowledge. We know that something is coming up. Bare knowledge, here's the simple definition, is the simple and direct experience of knowing what is present without making up stories about experience. So it's wonderful whenever we get in these great, concentrated, mindful, present moment, beautiful experiences. And so we can just be aware that, simply aware that, oh, this is what's happening. And there's the knowing. There's the simple knowing that the mind is concentrated, the mind is spacious. The body feels light. And then similarly, because now we're beginning to see the necessity and the value in these externalized stories, the next time our mind is proliferated wildly with thought about how you're wronged, then the bare knowledge is, there's the thought proliferation. The bare knowledge is, I'm angry. The bare knowledge is, there's a lot of thinking going on. Aversion, restlessness, desire for things to be different, whatever you're noticing. And so it takes looking directly at yourself in ways that we're not always inclined to do. And it can be very fulfilling when you identify these thought structures or identify these emotions. When you look at it directly and clearly identify what emotion that is, which is bare knowledge, or look at the thoughts moving and clearly identify, oh, this is aversion, which is the bare knowledge. So it's easier to do this when we're in that beautiful present moment, mindfulness, and we're having that experience. But it's a little bit more challenging to do that and maintain the awareness of the reactionary, externalized story. But we're learning to look directly at it. And what helps to look directly at these painful, reactionary stories, externalized stories, is knowing that they have a purpose and they're necessary for our evolution, for the evolution of the child mind that interpreted situations the best that he or she could. It's the evolution from those interpretations. It's the evolution from a child who didn't understand. So there's so much value in these reactions. There's so much value in these externalized stories. An equal amount of value, actually, as these beautiful, present moment, mindful experiences that we may have. So I think we're here together coming and seeing what bare knowledge is. So then the next question is, how do we maintain a continuity of this bare knowledge? Which is the next section that we're going to discuss here. Continuity of mindfulness. Continuity of mindfulness comes from repeatedly coming back to bare attention every time we're distracted. So that really is the new practice. That's the final refuge, is repeatedly coming back to the bare attention every time we're distracted. The final refuge is whatever's happening in our life. There's no life situation too crazy. There's no life situation too destroyed, too chaotic, too far gone. It's literally coming back to whatever's happening. That's the final refuge. Continuity implies a certain kind of right effort. It is not the effort to know, but the effort to repeatedly come back to bare knowing. From this practice of coming back from our wanderings to what is present in the moment, we can build a momentum of mindfulness, and at a certain point it begins to flow on by itself. Think of the time you learned to ride a bicycle. At first, we're struggling to find the balance, falling off, beginning again. But at a certain point, we build enough momentum for our forward movement that keeping the balance becomes effortless. We can see this same process at work in learning to play a musical instrument, becoming proficient at a sport, or developing skill in almost any discipline. In meditation, when a certain momentum of mindfulness is developed, we find less struggle and greater ease. So our practice of mindfulness, our practice of bare knowledge, our practice of just awakening to the reality of what's happening in any and every moment, coming back to bare attention, is just like riding a bicycle, and it builds up its own momentum. It's just like learning a new instrument. It's just like learning a sport. We keep practicing. We keep coming back to, and so the practice of mindfulness, to make it really clear, is just coming back to what's already happening. And maintaining mindfulness of what is happening. The same way when we move our arm, there's a knowing, I'm moving my arm. I'm moving my arm. And you could even do an audible sound in the head, I'm moving my arm. Or I'm confused. Or I'm frustrated. Or it can just be the witnessing of it as the present moment phenomenon. By including all the four foundations of mindfulness in the practice, the Buddha is giving the method for accomplishing bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness, because no experience is left out. If we're mad that we're not being mindful, then that's what we're mindful of. No experience is left out. If we're mad that we were done wrong, that's what we're being mindful of. There's value in the externalized story of being done wrong. That's what we're mindful of. No experience is left out. If pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feelings are predominant, we're mindful of them. If either wholesome or unwholesome mind states arise, we're mindful of them. As a continuity of bare knowing becomes stronger, awareness becomes more panoramic. So as bare knowing, as you keep coming back to the bare knowing again and again, this is what's happening, then the awareness becomes more panoramic, where it can include more parts than just your thoughts and your emotions. It can include the bare knowing of other people as they move through the room, the bare knowing of something someone else may be feeling. And these are just knowings, not thoughts about them, if that's what we perceive. Or the bare knowing of the table in the room, or the bare knowing of the computer that's in the room. It's just more panoramic. We know that it's there. It all happens at one time. It's a one-time happening knowing. It's always, there's just the knowing that of multiple things at one time. Not in the form of thought, where you can't really know more than one thing at a time. thought is, oh, there's the table, there's the person, there's what the person's experiencing, there's me, what I'm experiencing. So those are all separate thoughts. But with the direct experience of the present moment, then the knowing is more panoramic, where it all happens at one time. There's just the knowing of everything that's occurring in the moment. So as we keep coming back to the bare knowing again and again, that's our mindfulness practice. It's like riding a bicycle, it builds momentum. Then the result of that is our awareness becomes more panoramic. The emphasis moves from mindfulness of the content of the experience to mindfulness of the process of change itself. So what we have been describing, which is why the class is called the Final Refuge, a constant transition. The refuge, the moment, is constantly transitioning. So instead of the focus being so much the content, like the thoughts, the emotion, that's the content, that's the specific thing. It turns more into the process of change that it's in, the process of transition that it's in, because that's what life always is a constant change. It's a constant transition. The mind thinks in very linear this or that, yes or no. And so that's being aware of specific content of our experience. Whereas the evolution or the building of mindfulness, of being aware of the content, thought or emotions, is also being aware of the transition that things are in, because that's more of the reality of things. The present moment is constantly in a flux. It's constantly in a transition. So if our mind starts evolving from being aware of the content to being aware of the transition that's happening, then that's the mind mirroring reality. The first step is bare knowledge. Seeing life as the refuge. Being aware of coming back, like riding a bicycle, it takes practice. Being aware of the bare knowledge. You can say words to yourself of what it is. Desire, frustration, envy, love, happiness. And then they keep coming back, oh, this is love. Oh, this feels like love. Oh, this feels like this is anger. And keep coming back, like the bare knowledge of moving your hand, and that becomes the new inclination, and aware of the content. And as we're aware of the content and build that momentum, like riding a bicycle, aware of the mind coming back to the bare knowledge of the content, then that's the first step to the mind mirroring reality, which is aware of the transitions, aware of change itself. Everything is constantly in the middle of a transition. And so we watch as this mind state moves in and then moves out, which is the birth of a new one, a transition of a new one, moving in, which is the transition of a new one, moving in as it moves out, as a transition of another one, a new one moving in and moving out. This is constantly what's happening with everything. Our mind wants to label specifics. But that's not bare knowledge. That's not the direct reality. So this mindfulness of transitions or mindfulness of change is the mind finally mirroring reality. And that is the final refuge. The refuge of our life, which is a constant transition. All right, you guys. That's class for today. Our last class. Which is really the practice for the rest of our lives, and becoming good at remembering to come back to bare knowledge. And it is like riding a bicycle. After a while, you just hop on and do it. And some of the tools, this week wasn't really a tool, it's more like normalizing the refuge of your own life. And whatever's happening in our life is literally what we're becoming mindful of. We're not creating something different. However, the tools in the previous 4 classes can be of great assistance when deconstructing the mind's momentum to begin to live in this bare knowledge kind of way more and more as we gain momentum on that bicycle. So referring back to those classes can be helpful. Reminding ourselves what our practice is. Because that's really the point of these classes, is to have that new tool that we're filtering our experience through. Because if we don't have a focus for the day, then our mind will give us a focus. And it's usually what we don't want to have happen. It's usually the thing in our life that we really don't like. And so the mind will come up with that focus that you'll filter experiences through. And that's why we have these mindfulness classes, is to have a focus for the day or for the week that we're keeping in our mind as we move through our experiences in order to have and see evolution. This is how evolution happens, having something different to filter our experiences through. And this is how stagnancy happens, where we're filtering our experiences through the same filter again and again, as we have for years and decades. So referring back to the previous classes can be very helpful. All right, you guys. Before we go, I have a question for everyone. Since this is the last class, I would love if anyone would remark or comment on what their takeaway was from these 5 classes. What you think that you learned, or what was new or different that has stuck in your mind.